All right, everybody, welcome back. It's section 7.4, purchasing a home, that we're going to go over today. All right, so your warm-up says you save X dollars per month for 30 years. Express the savings after 30 years algebraically. All right, so first of all, the fact that it says algebraically should tell you there's going to be a variable in there somewhere. All right, this one's a little trickier than it looks. People have a tendency to want to put 30x, but you're not saving X dollars per year. If you were, you would just do 30 times X, right? You're saving $30 per month. So if you think about it, you do that month after month after month after 1 year, that's already 12x, right? So after 30 years, it's going to be the 30 from, that's how many years, and then you multiply it by 12x, right? Each year you save 12x dollars because you save, 1x in January, 1x in February, so on and so forth, total of 12x. So this is how much you save per year. Then you multiply by the number of years, and you get your answer, which is 360x. Okay, so today's lesson we're going to be going through the actual process of purchasing a home. All right, so some vocabulary we need to know about before we get there. Recurring and non-recurring costs. All right, recurring costs are exactly what they sound like. They're costs that happen over and over and over again. They keep occurring or recurring. So that might be a mortgage payment that is every month, right? Or property taxes, homeowners insurance, all those things. Those are bills that keep coming up. You keep having to pay, so they're costs that are recurring. There's another kind of cost associated with purchasing a home called non-recurring costs. So these are costs that do not recur. In other words, they're kind of one-time costs. So those things like moving your furniture from one home to another, that's a one-time cost. Closing costs are a one-time cost, right? Paying for your realtor fees or anything that got you into the new home, those are non-recurring costs. All right, closing. When you purchase a home, you will hear this term a lot: closing. All right, so it's closing of the loan. All right, the closing of the loan is the meeting that happens just before ownership transfers from the seller to the buyer. So it's kind of the final meeting between the buyer and seller of their home and the representatives. So these could be, real estate attorneys or something like that, but usually it just ends up being realtors, real estate agents, right? So usually the buyer will have their real estate agent with them, the seller will have their real estate agent with them, and they, represent the buyer and seller on their behalf. It's a very complicated, complex, type of meeting. Lots of very detailed paperwork and things that need to get done, things that most people wouldn't know how to do. So they kind of need a realtor or real estate agent working on their behalf. Right? And this meeting is kind of the final sign-off to make sure the sale is going to occur. All right, so closing costs are the costs that are due at closing. So at that meeting, there are certain things that you have to have paid for. And so those closing costs could be fees, title insurance, things like that. So one of those types of closing costs is something called an earnest money deposit. Right? The earnest money deposit basically is you showing in earnest as the buyer that you're serious about buying whatever property it is. So usually this happens real early in the process, and don't always have to have an earnest money deposit. It really kind of depends on the market, how hot it is. Something like New York City, Southern California, something where the real estate market is really thriving and there's a lot of business happening, right? Very kind of fast-paced deals getting made. A lot of times they will require an earnest money deposit. And basically it's you putting down some money and saying, hey, hold on to this home for me. I'm serious about buying it. Don't go sell it to somebody else. Just hold on to it. And, kind of doesn't prevent somebody from backing out of it, but it makes it less likely, because if I wanted to buy a home and I put down an earnest money deposit, I put down maybe a couple $1,000 to tell the seller, hey, hold on to this home. I'm a serious buyer. I want to buy it. Well, if I walk away from the deal, if I bail on it, they get to keep my earnest money deposits. That could be hundreds, maybe even thousands of dollars. So it makes it very unlikely that somebody's just going to flake out on the deal and not follow through. All right. By the way, that earnest money deposit is not always the same amount. I said earlier, some areas of the country don't even have this, and some it can be higher, some can be lower. It really is a function of kind of how competitive the market is, right? Because if it's a real fast-moving market and you hold on to the home for somebody and then they flake out on you, well, maybe you had a couple of other buyers who would have bought your house, but while you were busy telling them, hey, I think I got it sold, maybe they went and bought some other property, right? Attorney fees. Attorney fees are exactly what they sound like. The fees paid to an attorney in exchange for being represented at that closing meeting, right? And most people don't use an attorney when they're doing a real estate transaction. Most people just use real estate agents, realtors. Usually these attorney fees come from more mega money deals, maybe commercial real estate, where like, the new, medical offices are being built somewhere, right? And, maybe that kind of thing of a big money deal happening. Maybe then there might be attorneys involved in attorney fees. But usually it's just realtors, real estate agents. All right. Another fee that will be due at closing is something called an origination fee. And this is where they originate your loan paperwork. So they kind of, write all the loan documents. They fill them all out, complete all those loan documents. And it is truly a sight to behold, to be quite honest with you. When you buy your first home, who knows, maybe by then they'll be totally paperless, right? But the homes that I've bought for myself, I am absolutely flabbergasted every time I go to the closing, and I just seeing the sheer amount of legal documents. These loan documents are, it's just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pages. For somebody like me, or, maybe an everyday schlub who doesn't do this for a living, it's really overwhelming, just a sheer amount, sheer volume of paper. They all say different things. A lot of them are in kind of legalese speak. They're not really written in plain English, kind of written in legal English, which is very hard to understand to begin with. There's tons of it. You need to sign, I don't know, seems like about in 100 places somewhere in the documents. And it's pretty amazing to see these people who do it for a living. They know exactly which documents are which, where to go for what they mean, where to sign, where to initial. It's really pretty amazing. But there are a lot of documents involved in the purchasing of a home, and somebody has to fill all those out. Somebody has to, write all those documents. And, it's the lender typically who's doing this, right? The one who's lending you the money, right? And because they want to make sure they get their money back, right? And so they have to pay people to, used to be type out all those documents. Now it's, do them on the computer. But it takes somebody a lot of time, so they have to pay that person. So they charge you for that, and that's called the origination fee. All right. The title of the home is kind of like, I don't know if any of you have ever bought a car before, but when you buy the car, when you are done paying for it, right, when you own it completely by yourself, they'll give you what's called a pink slip, right? And it used to be a pink color, and that's why it's called a pink slip, right? And it's basically the title of ownership saying, Joe Smith is the owner of this vehicle, right? So when you buy your car and you don't have any more payments left, you've paid it all off, you will get the title of your car, and that shows that you are the owner of that car, right? Well, this is no different. The title on a property is once you're done paying it off, right? You don't get it ahead of time, right? It's only once you're done paying it off, you get the title. That's a piece of paper stating that you are the owner of that property. Now, until you're done paying it off, you don't technically own the home, the bank does, the lender, right? So they hold on to the title while you're paying off the loan, all right? So it's technically they're the owner until you pay them back. All right, now, when you buy a home, one of the things that comes up always is a title search. So a title search is the procedure of verifying that the person from whom you are buying the home actually owns that property and that they have the title free and clear. All right, so what do I mean by that? Let's say you wanted to come buy my house from me, right? And we agreed on a price. Everything seems on the up and up. Well, what if I'm a shady character and right before we exchange money and exchange the title on the home, right before I hand you the keys, I go out and take a loan. I go find somebody to give me a loan, and I use that house as collateral for my loan. In other words, I go take out a loan somewhere and I tell that lender, hey, if I don't pay back my loan, you can take my house. But let's say I'm really shady and I did that knowing that you were about to become the new owner of the home. Well, that lender, if I flake out on my payments, is going to come back and take that house from you, even though you weren't the one taking out the loan, I was. So kind of a weird kind of thing where there's this short period of time where the transfer of ownership is happening, where the title is getting transferred from the seller to the buyer, where that seller technically, most people would never do something like this, but some people could go out and take out a loan and use that house as a collateral, and then they sell you the house, now you're the owner, and then they go flake out on that loan, and that lender comes and tries to repossess your house, right? And sell it to get their money back from that loan, right? So this is very, very rare, but the title search tends to pick things up like that. It lets you know, hey, that person you're buying the home from, do they have any liens on the property? In other words, do they have any loans that they've taken out that use the house as collateral? Is there any buddy that the owner still owes money to that they could come after the house for, after you buy it from them. Right, so that's what the title search does. And then there's another thing called title insurance, where you're kind of getting insured so that just in case during that little brief kind of period of time where the transfer of ownership occurs, if something pops up that the title search didn't find, you're not going to be held liable for that. So it's a really pretty intricate process, a lot of steps along the way, not the easiest thing to understand. Now, all of these things, short of this one, short of the title search, the origination of fee, the attorney fees, earnest money deposit, all those collectively go into something called closing costs. And usually closing costs run about 2 to 6% of the purchase price. Okay, 2 to 6% of the purchase price. So if you, consider, your typical home here in Temecula, the average is about $500,000, right? Well, 2 to 6%, right? 1% of 500,000 is 5,000, right? So 2% would be 10,000, right? 6% would be 30,000. So if you take a $500,000 home and you take 2% of that, that's 10,000. You take 6% of that, that's 30,000. So typical closing costs on a typical home here in Temecula would run you somewhere between $10,000 and $30,000. Right? So there's a lot of kind of wiggle room in there. Obviously, ideally, you'd pay closer to $10,000 rather than $30,000, but sometimes people, are kind of a mark, kind of a sucker, and some people kind of take advantage of you and charge you maybe a little bit more than they should, right? But either way, somewhere between $10,000 and $30,000 extra on top of the price of the home, right? That's a lot of money, right? So obviously, you want to pay as little of that as possible. All right, a little more vocabulary. Points on a loan. Okay, a point on a loan is an extra fee that is equal to 1% of the loan amount. That's important to know. A point on a loan is the same value as 1% of the loan amount. So once again, let's go back to that typical home here in Temecula, right? Average home here in Temecula, $500,000. Well, 1% of that is $5,000. So a point would be a fee that is valued at or worth $5,000. Okay. And the point is charged by the lender. So you go to a lender to get a home loan, and they can charge you points on that loan. Right? They can charge you points on that loan, and every point that they charge you is 1% of the loan amount. So once again, that Temecula house, $500,000. Every point they charge you is going to cost you $5,000. So if they charge you 2 points on a loan, that's $10,000. If they charge you 3 points on the loan, that's $15,000. Right? So what are these points? Well, there's a couple of different kinds of points. There's a couple of different types. The first one are origination points. And these probably are the more common kind. These are points that they charge you to do, that paperwork, that origination of the loan paperwork. All right. Now, one thing you'll hear some things, they'll say, oh, no origination fees, right? But then instead of charging you an origination fee, they'll charge you origination points. So pretty much the same thing, kind of just a little bit sneaky to say, oh, there are no origination fees. Well, yeah, but there are origination points, right? So it's just money they charge you to do the paperwork on the loan, right? And each point they charge you, once again, is 1% of the value of the home, 1% of the purchase price. Okay, and this, by the way, is of the purchase price. This is not of the, this is of the, loan amount if you put down 0% as a down payment, right? Most people put more than that as a down payment. So this is 1% of the loan amount, not necessarily 1% of the purchase price. Okay, so be careful on that. All right, the other kind of point that they can charge you are discount points. And discount points are used to discount or lower your interest rate. All right, so let's say I go and I try and get a loan, and I don't like the terms of the loan. I don't like maybe I got bad credit, or maybe the loan just isn't a very good one, and they're charging me a very high interest rate. I can pay them money up front in order for them to lower my interest rate over the life of the loan. Okay, so if I paid a discount point, remember a point is 1% of the loan amount. So once again, let's consider this as a Temecula home, $500,000 home. So 1% of a $500,000 loan would be $5,000. All right, so I could pay a point. I could pay $5,000 today, and it would lower my interest rate either 0.25% or maybe 0.3%. It lowers my interest rate for the whole duration of my loan, the whole term. So I could pay $5,000 today in order to save me 30 years worth of interest, right? And sometimes this is worth it, sometimes this is not, and we'll kind of talk about that here in a little bit. But discount points are money or points, right? 1% of the loan that you pay in order to discount or lower your interest rate. That's why people pay a discount point, is they want a lower interest rate than what they have, or what they were quoted. All right, let's look at another thing called prepaid interest. All right, now when you rent a home, let's say you go and rent a home and you move in June 1st. If you move in June 1st, you have to pay that rent ahead of time. You pay on or before June 1st, and that lets you live in that home until the end of the month, June 30th. Right? So that's the way rent works. That's the way leases and rents work. Right? Mortgage interest doesn't work that way. When you buy a home, interest accrues on that loan. Right? You borrowed money. Now, what happens is, instead of looking at it, kind of collecting this ahead of time, what they do is the whole month goes by, and during that month, the principal that you borrowed on the home, right, your principal, your loan amount, is accruing interest throughout the month. And then at the end of the month, they have you pay it. So whereas rent and leases, you pay the rent or the lease up front at the beginning of the month for the whole, so that you can live there the whole month, right? When you buy a home, it's the opposite. You live there the whole month, but then after that month, all this interest has accrued. So then you have to pay the interest at the end of the month. Okay. Now, when you go to buy a home, right, there's going to be a period of time where they charge you this prepaid interest. And that covers the interest that accrues between the closing and your first mortgage payment. All right, so consider, let's say I think the day you're going to be watching this video will be May 8th. Let's say today you buy a home, May 8th. Okay, now May 8th, your loan is going to accrue some interest, or you're going to owe the bank some interest at the end of today, May 8th. And then May 9th, more interest. May 10th, more interest. May 11th, more interest, all the way out to May 31st. Your loan is going to accrue interest from today, May 8th, all the way out to the end of the month, May 31st. Okay? Now, the way a mortgage normally works is once that interest accrues, from May 8th all the way to May 31st, some interest accrues throughout that remainder of the month, and then you have to pay it. Okay? But when you buy a home, you actually don't get charged. You don't have to make a payment until the month after you buy. So if you bought your home today, May 8th, you wouldn't actually make a payment until next month, June 8th. Okay, so there is interest that accrues. By the way, when you make your payment on June 8th, right, next month, it would have the beginning of the month through June 8th, right? So that would be 8 days worth of interest on that bill. Okay, but to pay out the remainder of this month, the bank is going to charge you prepaid interest. They're going to say, hey, this person's buying the house on May 8th, but they don't actually have a payment until June 8th. June 8th will be their very first payment. So, and the June 8th payment will cover June's interest, right? So how do we get May's interest? Well, they charge you this prepaid interest. So here's what you need to know for prepaid interest, kind of a confusing thing, but basically you take whatever day of the month it is, like today, May 8th, and then you count today, and then you count all the other days for the rest of the month, right? And, if you went from today, May 8th, out to May 31st, that's, if you include today, May 8th, that's 24 total days. So you would owe 24 days worth of prepaid interest. If you were to buy a home today, you'd have to pay out the interest for the rest of the month. Okay, so they want to make sure, some weird reason, maybe you buy the house and never make a single payment, they want to make sure they still get May's interest from you. So they charge you up front, and that's called prepaid interest. All right, so there's another thing called a transfer tax. This is a tax on transferring the title from the seller to the buyer, and it's just, normally not a ton of money, but it's just yet another tax you got to pay. All right, amortization table. We have talked about an amortization table before. I'm going to show you an example of one toward the end of these slides, right? And that is a chart that shows how much you originally borrowed, the loan amount, how much each monthly payment is, right? How many total monthly payments there are, how much of your monthly payment is going toward paying down the principal that you borrowed, how much of your monthly payment is going toward the bank for interest or toward the lender for interest. Okay? So it's a pretty handy little thing that kind of is kind of I don't know, a snapshot of exactly what's going on with that loan at any given time. You can look at, hey, what's my monthly payment this month? How much of that's going to interest? How much of that's going to principal? Or you can look further down and go, all right, well, how about, 8 years from now? What's my monthly payment going to be? How much am I going to still owe on the home? How much of my payment is going to go toward principal? How much of my payment is going to go toward interest? All right, let's do an example here. You buy a home for $500,000 and you put down a 22% down payment to avoid PMI. So remember this PMI, private mortgage insurance. If you have less than 22% equity, if you own less than 22% of the value of your home, banks will usually charge you this private mortgage insurance. It's usually, $100, $200 extra, but it's a sunken cost. It's money that you never see back, right? So it's a really kind of a big waste. So you want to try and put down 22%, and have 22% equity at all times on your home, so you don't have to pay this PMI. It's just kind of wasted money. All right. Now the APR, the interest rate, is 4.6%, and the loan will close on May 6th. How much can you expect to pay in prepaid interest at the closing? All right, so this is a lot like that example I was just talking to you a minute ago, except instead of May 8th, this is May 6th. All right, so let's get through it here. How much are we going to pay in prepaid interest at the closing? All right, so first of all, you might be tempted to look at this and go, oh, $500,000, but you got to look close and realize that you put down 22% as a down payment. So even though you're buying the home for $500,000, that's not actually what the loan amount is. Okay, so the first thing we got to do is calculate the down payment and the loan amount. All right, so the down payment is the purchase price, $500,000, times the down payment percentage, 22%, 0.22. That gives you a down payment of $110,000. All right. So that's how much you're going to pay up front. So you are not borrowing all $500,000. You're already paying this amount up front. So let's figure out, well, how much are we really borrowing then? Well, to get your loan amount, just take the purchase price, what the house cost, $500,000, and then subtract away the loan amount, which was $110,000. And when you do that, you get $390,000 as your loan amount. And so that's actually what's being borrowed on this home, $390,000. Okay. All right, now it says the loan will close on May 6th. How much can you expect to pay in prepaid interest at the closing? All right, so how much are you going to pay in interest? So remember, there are two interest formulas. There's IPERT, or the other one is the balance minus principal formula. Okay, the top one, IPERT. The only time you can ever use IPERT is if this thing, the principal, is not changing. Okay? If the period of time that you're trying to calculate interest for, this principal does not change. In other words, you're not making payments and that principal goes down, or you're not borrowing more money and the principal goes up or anything. If the principal remains unchanged while you're trying to find the interest over that period, then you can use IPERT. Okay, so an example of this is if you go back a couple chapters, we were talking about student loans. Remember when you get a student loan while you're in school, you're not making payments. All right, so since you're not making payments while you're in school, to get the interest while you're in school, you can use IPERT. Okay, but then after school's over, you have this 6-month grace period after school, and after that 6-month grace period, then you do start making payments. And when you do start making payments, the principal changes, so you can no longer use the top equation, you now have to use the bottom equation. All right, so a very kind of maybe a little bit confusing, but very important distinction to know when to use the IPERT and when to use the balance minus principal formula. So let me say this again. If the principal remains unchanged. The amount of money borrowed does not change, right? And no payments are getting made to make that principal get paid off or anything, then you use IPERT. If the principal is changing, if there are payments getting made where that principal is changing, then you use this bottom equation, that one right there. Okay? So let's look at this. All right, in this problem, we are just buying a home, and it closes on May 6th. Okay? And it's wanting us to get the prepaid interest, the interest for the rest of the month. So we're looking for the interest from May 6th to May 31st. Okay? Now, I told you in the last slide that if you buy the house on May 6th, you don't actually make any payments until 1 month after that. Okay? So in other words, between May 6th and May 31st, you are not making any payments. And if you are not making any payments, then the way you calculate your interest is using IPERT. I equals P times R times T. All right, so that's how I knew to use that formula right there. I knew that because it's prepaid interest, I'm paying the interest up front before I make any payments that pay down my principal. Then I use the IPERT formula. All right. Now the principal, I know what it is. I just figured it out. So here is the principal on the loan. That's how much we're borrowing. Now the interest rate, I know that, right? It gave it to us right there in the problem. There's my interest rate. And if I use a 1 here, I got to be careful. The T, the time, is always years. So if I use a 1, that's actually 1 year's worth of interest. Okay. So that's how much interest would accrue on this loan after a full year if I didn't make any payments. Okay? But I don't want a full year's worth of interest, right? When I go from May 6th to May 31st, I'm not talking about how many years pass by. I'm not even talking about how many months or weeks pass by. When I go from May 6th to May 31st, I'm talking about how many days pass by. So I need to calculate this interest, right? And instead of a year's worth of interest, I need to convert that into daily interest. Much interest per day? All right, well, if there's $17,940 in interest for an entire year, just do the unit conversion, and you'll know how much interest accrues per day. So on this loan, $49.15 worth of interest is accruing every single day. Okay, and remember, when I'm finding prepaid interest, I'm taking from the closing day, 5/6, out to the end of the month. May has 31 days, so it's out to the 31st. So I got to calculate, well, how many days is that? Okay, how many days is it to go from May 6th out to May 31st? Right, so May 6th to May 31st, that's 26 days. Now be careful, if you actually do 31 minus 6, you don't get 26, you get 25. Okay, but that's because you got to count where you begin and where you end. Okay, so normally when you count, you wouldn't count 1 until you get to the next day, May 7th, right? That would be 1 day after closing, but the closing costs include the day of closing as well. So this is kind of like really day 1 right here. All right, so it's 26 days. Well, if I'm doing 26 days, right, 26 days, and each day is accruing $49.15 worth of interest, multiply those. Okay? And it'll give you your total prepaid interest, which is $1,277.90. So on this loan, you're going to have to pay that at closing. Okay, so before you get the keys to the home, before you get that title turned over to you or anything like that, you have to pay this in prepaid interest right here, $1,277.90. Okay, next example. You've been approved for a 30-year mortgage at an APR of 5.2% for a loan amount of $450,000. All right, so be careful here. Once again, it's really important that you read carefully on these word problems. Don't just skip to the numbers. Read what it's saying. Okay, it's telling you the loan amount is $450,000. That's not how much the price of the home was. That's the loan amount. That's the principal. All right, how much of your first monthly payment will go to interest and how much will go to principal? Okay, so to know how much of your first monthly payment is going to go, remember when you make a monthly payment, some of that goes toward interest for the bank. Some of that payment goes toward paying down the principal, the loan amount that you borrowed. Some of it goes to paying this back, right? So some of your monthly payment goes to paying that $450,000 back. Some of it goes toward interest for the bank. Okay, so when you make a monthly payment, some of it's paying back your principal, some of it's going toward interest for the bank. This question is asking how much of it is going toward paying back your principal and how much of it is going toward interest for the bank. All right, either way, to know that answer, to know how much of your monthly payment goes to one place or another, you have to actually know what your monthly payment is to begin with. So let's use our monthly payment formula. Okay, there it is. They're giving you the principal. Right, they're giving you the time as 30 years. They're giving you your interest rate, 5.2%. Plug that stuff in. Looks like that. And let the calculator do the heavy lifting here for you. And when you do, you get a monthly payment of $2,471. Okay. Now the question doesn't ask how much is the monthly payment. It's asking how much of this goes toward principal and how much of this goes toward interest. Okay. All right, so now we got to think about, all right, so how do I figure this out? There's one little trick in this problem that most of you probably overlooked, and it's really easy to overlook. It says right here, let's read this, how much of your first monthly payment will go toward interest? Okay, so if it's your very first payment, that means you haven't made any payments yet. And if you haven't made any payments yet, then that means you haven't changed your principal. You haven't paid any principal back yet. So in other words, you can calculate your interest because you have not made any payments yet. You have not changed your principal. You use IPERT to calculate your interest. Okay. We know the principal, we know the rate, we know the time. Let's plug that stuff in. Notice for the time I used 1/12. Right, because if I use a 1, that means 1 full year. Right, time in your T is measured in years. So to figure out 1 month's worth of interest, it's 1/12 of a year. Right, that's your T. Right, and when you do that, you get interest of $1,950. Okay, so now we know that yes, I was making a monthly payment of $2,471, but $1,950 of that payment was going toward interest. So now we should be able to get how much was going toward principal. Okay, to figure out how much is going toward principal, I'm going to take my monthly payment and subtract away my interest paid. In other words, I'm going to know, hey, I'm paying this much per month. There is my monthly payment. And this is the amount that went to interest. That's the interest paid. I'm going to plug those in and I'm going to know, hey, if I paid $2,471 and $1,950 of that was interest, then the remainder must be the principal, which is $521. Okay. Now, I would like to point something very important out at this point. Less math related and more just kind of finance savviness as far as how these loans operate that is very important for you to know. Notice how at the beginning of the loan in this problem, the amount that you pay every month toward principal is way less than the amount that you pay toward interest. In fact, you're paying about 4 times as much in interest as you are in principal. At the beginning of the loan, that's how this works. The beginning of a loan, you pay a lot in principal, in interest, and not very much in principal. Okay, there's 2 primary reasons for this. First of all, think about how interest is calculated. Right? If every payment you make, this principal gets smaller and smaller and smaller, doesn't that mean the amount of interest you're going to owe gets smaller and smaller and smaller as well? Yeah. So the more payments you make, that means you now owe less and less money to the bank. So you're going to owe less and less interest. You're going to get charged less and less interest because you don't owe as much anymore. The other reason for this is the bank usually front loads your interest, where you pay, look how much more interest you're paying at the beginning of the loan than principal. The bank wants to make sure they get their interest, so they make you pay that up front. They don't let you, there's never like a principal-only loan where they let you pay the interest at the end. They want their interest up front. Right? They want to make sure they're going to get their money. All right, so in this case, we knew what the monthly payment was. So this was the total monthly payment. Okay, and some of it went toward interest, some of it went toward principal. If you add those together, you get your $24.71. And this was with a 30-year mortgage. So this was so you're making this payment 360 total times over 30 years. Okay, the next example, before we get there, I forgot there's one last thing I wanted to show you. Okay, I told you, look, the overwhelming majority of your payment is going toward interest, 79%, and only 21% of your payment is going toward paying off your principal. All right, so about 4 times more roughly. All right, now the next example wants you to do the same thing, except instead of a 30-year loan, we want to do it with a 20-year loan. All right, so some things for us to expect before we get into this. Hopefully this is sunk in with you by now. Either way, you're paying back the same amount of money. It's $450,000. Okay. Now, isn't it true that the less time I give you to pay me off, right? If I lent you money, the less time I give you to pay me off, your payment has to be bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay. The more time I give you to pay me off, your payment can be smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay. So an example I've used in class is this. If I lent you $100 and I told you you have 5 months to pay me off, okay? If I lend you $100 to pay me off in 5 months, it's got to be $20 per month, right? That's if you have 5 months. Okay, well, what if I lent you $100 and I said, hey, I need that money quicker. You can't take 5 months to pay me back. You got to pay me back in 2 months. Well, if I only give you 2 months, now you have less time to pay me back, so your payments have to be bigger. Right? It's going to go from 20 to 50. Well, what if I say, oh, wait, never mind, relax. I'm going to give you 10 months to pay me off. Well, now, 10 months to pay off $100, that's $10 a month. Okay, notice the more time you get, like 2 months, a short amount of time, the payment has to be big. If your payment, you get a little more time to pay me off, your payment can get smaller. If you have even more time to pay me off, your payment can get even smaller than that. Right? So the more time you have to pay off a loan, the less you have to pay per month because you're making more payments, right? You're spreading that payment out, okay? Conversely, the less time you have to pay off a loan, now you're condensing it, condensing how much time you have to pay off the loan, so that means each payment has to be bigger. All right, so going into this problem, we should expect that, hey, it's a 20-year loan. There's less time to pay it off. So it must be a bigger monthly payment. And that's actually what happens here. Using the same formula, now we're putting in 20s here instead of 30s. And we do have a bigger monthly payment. The last problem, the monthly payment, I think was $24.71 or something. This payment's $3,019. It's a bigger payment, once again, because you have less time to pay it off. Okay? So it's about $550 more per month, right? So by shortening the time from 30 to 20 years, shortening the term, right, the payment has to get bigger to account for that. It has to get bigger by about $550 here. Okay, so if I want to calculate the interest, right, from that first month, how much of this payment is going toward interest? Once again, it's the first payment. Okay. In the first month, the first payment, no payments have been made yet, so there has been no change in the principal, so I can use IPERT. And there it is, $1,950 again. Notice that did not change because the loan amount did not change, the interest rate did not change, and the 1 month's time did not change. So it's still $1,950 worth of interest. But because this payment is bigger, right, your monthly payment's bigger, but the interest itself did not change. Well, if the monthly payment got bigger and how much of it went toward interest didn't change, that must mean that a bigger amount is going to go toward principal. And that's what happens here. Okay? In the principal, right, the principal amount you pay is going to be the monthly payment, $3,019, minus how much of that goes toward interest, $1,950. And now we know how much went toward principal. Okay. All right, so in this case, 65% is now going to interest, and 35% is going toward principal. In the last example, it was 79% and 21%. Okay, so in the last example, a lot more of your payment was going to interest, and a lot less of your payment was going toward principal. Now, because you're paying this loan off quicker, you're paying down the principal faster, so you don't have to pay as much in interest. Right? Instead of 79%, it's 65%. Okay, so in other words, yes, this payment was about $550 more a month, but you're wasting way less money on interest. Okay, 14% less in interest, 14%, which also, by the way, means 14% more in principal. All right, so I promised I'd show you an amortization table. So here's what an amortization table looks like. Again, this is not the full amortization table, and I know that because it's telling us we started with $100,000, and look, by the end of it, we haven't paid off all $100,000. We're not even close yet. Okay, so this is just the top snapshot of an amortization table. But some important things that come up. First of all, it says we started, that was our beginning principal, owing $100,000. And now we have this monthly payment. By the way, look how the monthly payments are the same all the way down. The monthly payment is not changing. Okay? Now, of that monthly payment, some of it is going toward principal, and some of it is going toward interest. And if I add these two together, right, if I add my principal and my interest, I get this, the total payment. Okay, so 120.15 plus 416.67 is 536.82. Okay, now when I made that $536 payment, right, this amount went toward paying down the principal. So by the end of this period, I no longer owe this full $100,000. Right, I paid this toward $120 went toward paying off that principal. So now I owe $120 less on my principal, $99.79.85. Okay, now that amount, since that's what I owe at the end of the first period, it's also what I owe at the beginning of the second period. It covers over. Now I make that same payment again. Some of that payment goes toward principal, some of that payment goes toward interest, okay, and this portion gets paid down, right? And so now I owe even less and less money. All right, so one other thing worth pointing out here is even though the monthly payment stays the same, look at the principal amount. It goes from 120 to 120.66 to 121.16, 121 to 122 to 123 to 124 to 125, right? Notice I'm picking up speed, how quickly I'm paying off the principal. I'm paying more and more and more money toward principal each month. And that has to be because I'm paying less and less in interest. Look, went from 416 to 415 to 414, 413, 412, 411, right? I'm paying less and less of every payment going toward this guy, interest, and more of every payment is going toward principal. So I'm kind of picking up speed as I pay off this loan. The longer I go, the less interest I pay and the more principal I pay. And here is what that looks like graphically. So you've got two curves there. You've got a red curve where you start up here at about, looks like about 82, 83%, something like that. Okay, and down here you've got months, right? So it's telling you as the months progress, as you go all the way out to a 360 month loan, which is 30 years, you start with 80% of your payment going toward interest. And in about month about 222 or so, in this example, about month 222, which by the way is like year 18 and a half, at about year 18 and a half out of 30, you're paying an equal amount of principal and interest. It's right at 50%. Okay? And then beyond that, you pay less and less interest all the way to the very bottom where you pay no more interest on the loan because you've paid it all off. All right, now the principal is what's in blue. All right, so your principal payments start way down here at say maybe 18%, and they go up until you get here. You're 18 and a half. Your interest and your principal are the same, both 50%, and it climbs up and up. In other words, as you get further and further along through the loan, more and more of your principal is getting paid off.